The Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, has stopped off in Singapore on his way to the G7 summit in Britain. He and his Singaporean counterpart, Lee Hsien Loong, have been holding this year's annual talks, focusing on a potential travel bubble between Australia and the city-state. China has also been a topic of conversation. Adam Hancock is a journalist based in Singapore who joins us live now. Morning, Adam.
Good morning, Tom.
So can I just ask you firstly, Singapore is currently in a partial lockdown because of rising COVID cases. What's the situation there at the moment?
Yes, we've had about 4 weeks now of restrictions. So they closed all restaurants and bars. Work from home became the default, and group sizes, the maximum you could have was 2 people. But things have actually got a lot better over the last couple of weeks. The cases really have gone down. We're down to around about 2 or 3 cases a day. And actually yesterday was quite significant because a sort of reopening was announced. So from next week, restaurants are going to open, group size are going to go back up again. So it does feel like we're sort of coming out of the next stage of this recent lockdown. The cases came up at one stage. We were having maybe like 30, 40 cases a day, and things felt like they were getting quite serious. But their policies here of containing, ring fencing, contact tracing have all actually worked very well. And I think the lockdown restrictions have really pushed down the numbers. So it was probably a good day for Scott Morrison to be here because it coincided with the day that we kind of began to come out of lockdown again. So it's probably picked his timing well.
Yeah, so given those talks between the two leaders and the trends that you're talking about there, I mean, how likely is a travel bubble going to be at the moment between Singapore and Australia? What's the sense?
Well, I think it's certainly on the agenda, and I think they both said last night that they're looking to work on it. They're looking to try and put the framework in place, but they were very careful not to overcommit to anything, and that has kind of been the way it's been the whole time in terms of talks between Singapore and Australia. It's very hard, as you know, over there to get a travel bubble off the ground. We've had 3 attempts now with Hong Kong. Every single time it's about to happen, one of the places has had a spike in cases, and the bubble has had to close before even starting. So I wouldn't be overly optimistic on it at the moment. I think Singapore is very keen for it to happen. They've had their borders open to Australia for a while now. Most people in Australia can come here, quickly do a test, wait for the results, and then they're free to travel. But it's waiting for Australia to open up to Singapore has been the problem. I think they're particularly keen on students, trying to get students from Singapore back to Australia so they can finish their studies. They kind of spoke about possibly using students as a bit of a pilot to see how a bubble could work. But there's still a long way to go, I feel, in terms of trying to find boundaries of a travel bubble. So, for example, when we had our one with Hong Kong, it was based on unlinked cases and the kind of moving average on them. So if it went above 5, they would close. And if it stayed below 5, they would keep it open. So it's trying to find those metrics with what both countries are comfortable with and how they could kind of keep a travel bubble open if a small number of cases come up in either place.
Yeah, so when we look at some of the practical issues that need to be resolved, and as you say, these are challenging to get up. I mean, have vaccine certificates, for example, been flagged, something like that?
Yes, yeah. It was mentioned again in the press conference last night. The Prime Minister here, Lee Hsien Loong, he said that they were working towards trying to recognise vaccine certificates from Australia, most likely in a digital form. It's something that Singapore has mentioned a lot. I think they see a kind of vaccine certificate approach as a way of resuming travel. They've agreed, for example, to recognise vaccines in Malaysia, and they're working on a system of doing that at the moment. So I think that will be one of the key things, although at this stage at the moment, I think it's about 50% have had a first dose now here, so it's not full coverage at the moment. I still think their main metrics would probably be focused around case numbers, rather than just basing it all about a vaccine. So, for example, the situation and the arrangement with Hong Kong had no real relation to vaccines at the moment. It wasn't really related to, you had to be vaccinated to come. There was none of that. It was just based on case numbers in either place. So I think eventually down the line, it's going to be very important. But at the moment, I think if any kind of bubble is arranged, it will probably be based around cases rather than recognising vaccine certificates.
Just to another issue, Adam, while we've got you there, our Prime Minister, Scott Morrison's been gradually hardening his rhetoric on China recently. That might run in direct contrast to Prime Minister Lee's view in Singapore. Do you think Singapore is concerned with Australia's current approach to China?
I think they will be, yes. For Singapore, anything that kind of threatens stability in this region or tensions on a global scale, they spoke a lot, for example, about ongoing tension between the US and China. any of that is a concern for them. Singapore is very happy to be neutral, very happy for the status quo to continue. They don't really want anything that is going to rock the boat. And one of their, closest allies in terms of Australia, if they're being quite hard on China, that will probably be a little bit uncomfortable for Singapore. I know, for example, that PM Lee last night, he mentioned that Australia, they don't have to like China, they don't have to be like them, but they should try and find a way to work with them. And that's kind of been Singapore's position from the off, encouraging countries to set aside their differences and kind of work together for the global good.
What about the ongoing crisis in Myanmar as well, just while we've got you there, following the military coup, of course? How's that been seen in Singapore?
Initially, they were quite slow to respond, and I think there was a little bit of surprise about Singapore kind of keeping out of it a little bit and not releasing any strong statements. Singapore does have some skin in the game. They're one of the biggest investors in the country, so a fair bit was at stake for them. But slowly they have come forward and they've started to get stronger in terms of calling for peace, calling for political negotiation. The foreign minister recently, I think 2 days ago, even came out and sort of had to criticise the slow progress that's going on in resolving the crisis. No sign, obviously, of political prisoners being released, for example. So they have got stronger in terms of what they're saying. They're part of ASEAN as well. So collectively, as a group, they're trying to find a solution. Lee Hsien Loong recently went to a meeting in Indonesia about Myanmar as well. So after an initial slow response, I think they really have started to get involved and started to push their cause to try and find peace in Myanmar.
Adam, thank you very much for joining us this morning. Appreciate your time.
No problem.
That's Adam Hancock there, journalist based in Singapore.